It's been a while since my last video of nonsense about Jamaica debunked. Time for another one. And we're going to have a look if media destroys Jamaica.
Where guns and gangs drive the drug trade.
And if you can't kill him, I go kill him.
They give you one pina colada and you forgive the worst poverty you've ever seen.
It's not a friendly country. All that one love stuff is bullshit, frankly.
With this episode, we're first going to focus on a few principles of why and how journalists create their stories, to discuss how media works as a whole. And then we shall break down a few examples, specifically from foreign media about Jamaica. Local media is an entirely different animal, and it will be covered in a separate episode. So first, international media versus Jamaica. Before we start, I have to make this disclaimer because who am I to criticize the almighty international media, another YouTube expert? Unlike representatives of foreign media, I actually live in Jamaica, but that's not what makes me an expert. You see, when I made a video on real estate in Jamaica, I invited a real estate professional to help me. When I made a documentary on ITAL lifestyle, again, I gave my platform to the experts on the subject. But if there is a subject I know a lot about, media is certainly one of them. I was lucky to do my first degree in journalism and social science at City University in London, which is regarded as the best school of journalism in the UK, as well as the nation's largest centre for journalism education. As I studied journalism there for 3 years, I absolutely hated it. Not City University is brilliant. I just couldn't stand journalism, the concept, the way it works, everything about it from start to finish. That's why when I had only 2 months left to finish my degree, I quit. I didn't quit education, I went to do a different degree from scratch. I just didn't want to have anything to do with journalism. And the reason for that is exactly why I'm making this video. You see, the problem of working in the media is not fake news. It's about the whole system. I thought a journalist is somebody who writes contemporary history by reporting current events based on facts and supported with proof and evidence. A fighter who gives the voice to the voiceless. But that's in the ideal world. In reality, the only option to be a successful journalist is to join that system and play by its rules. Some of them really ugly. Basically, as a journalist, if you want to talk about flowers and unicorns, no one is going to pay you. So instead, you have to talk about this. And that's not because you're evil, it's because you want to make a living, and the demand for this is much higher than for flowers and unicorns. Alright, so once we got that out of the way, let's go back to media coverage of Jamaica. As a foreigner, if you've never been to Jamaica and you don't have Jamaican friends, what do you know about this country? As a Ukrainian, when I lived in Ukraine, I knew 3 things: reggae music, cannabis, and that Jamaica is a poor country. It's interesting how all of these things are wrong, even reggae. Now, the new stereotype is forming that everybody listens to dancehall, which is not true either. But if you want live reggae, you really need to know places. Jamaica has a higher standard of living than Ukraine, so if anyone can view Jamaica as a poor country, definitely not Ukrainians. However, the majority of visitors who come to Jamaica are Americans, 68.6%. The other 2 large markets are Canada and the UK. Unlike Ukrainians, all of them have an access to a lot of positive information about Jamaica. Resorts, beautiful nature, delicious food. But note, this kind of positive image of Jamaica is mostly spread by Jamaicans themselves, tourists who've been to Jamaica, and people who work in the tourism industry. But if we talk about the image promoted by the media, it's largely negative, of course, and it influences the way Jamaicans think of themselves, including the ones who live in Jamaica. So, what do we think we know about Jamaica? Here I would like to focus on things universally known about Jamaica. And here they are. You might think that Jamaicans are aggressive. There are high levels of poverty and corruption. And the main thing is that Jamaica has a much bigger problem with crime than anywhere else in the world. If you're one of the people who believe this is the case, and I've seen both foreigners and Jamaicans who hold this opinion, ask yourself a question: how do you know that? The answer? Because it's true. Okay, let's assume it is, but how do you know it's true? Unless you are a criminologist, economist, sociologist, and psychologist, you cannot possibly know. Let me prove this to you with an example about poverty. Most of us don't study economics, certainly not at the required level to understand the concept of poverty and wealth, especially when it comes to a country. How do you even define a poor country? Turns out, there is no definition. It's a phrase that was made up by the media. The correct term for this would be low-income country or developing country. But it's confusing too. Developing in what way? Not all developing countries have low income. Jamaica is one of the examples. It's classified as upper middle income country. Here. Does that mean everyone has upper middle income in Jamaica? Of course not. In fact, whether the country is poor or rich has nothing to do with the standard of living in that country. Look at places like Venezuela, Russia, or Equatorial Guinea. They are high-income countries, but that's because of exporting oil. It doesn't say anything about how this money is distributed among the population of these countries. Another favorite term is a third world country, and it's usually in the context, what do you expect, third world country? Older generation probably know what I'm going to say now, but for younger generation, let me point out, Sweden is a third world country, while, say, Namibia is first world. Here's a map. This is because these terms come from Cold War. There was Western Bloc led by the USA, known as First World, blue on the map. Eastern Bloc, red on the map, led by USSR, known as Second World. And then there was everybody else, the neutral countries, green on the map, called Third World. So yeah, Jamaica is a third world country, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. This is a primary example how media picked up that out-of-date term, twisted it completely, and made it sound as if something insulting. And this is another problem. Statistics is not just some numbers. It's a mathematical science, quite complicated one too. Anyone can learn it, but it takes time and effort. In case you're not aware, professional journalists study statistics as a part of their degree. Most of their audience don't. This gives an advantage to journalists like me to present information any way I want, and then use statistics as proof. For example, I want to push the narrative that Jamaica is a poor country, so I will present a graph that proves my point by showing that poverty in Jamaica is increasing. Here. This is probably the most basic trick that journalists do to manipulate public opinion. They look at the whole graph and pick the time frame that fits their story. That's it. Look at the time period here, from 2007 to 2012. But if you zoom out the graph, you will see that the poverty actually dropped in Jamaica from around 30% to 19.9% in 2012. And yes, there was a peak at 44% in the 90s. A completely different story, isn't it? But not a very accurate either. What happened before 1989 or what happened after 2012? But it will take a few more hours to find that data for 2020. And I will do that for living conditions video later. So if you don't want to miss that, don't forget to check your bell notification. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe. But the point I was making with that statistics example, you actually need to know how to analyze statistical data to be able to use it properly. And the trick I showed you is just one of many that journalists use to support their stories. And this brings us to another problem. Who is going to check all this information? To write the script for this video, it took me 8 days, working 12 hours per day, because I had to check and cross-reference every single statement I make in this video. And I'm sure I could have made a mistake somewhere. I don't know, I might find it later. I don't have an editor, so... But are you going to spend as much time to check this now? I can throw these graphs at you like I just did, but do you trust me? What if I lied? What if I just created these graphs by myself? And this is another loophole that journalists can abuse. Okay, low-quality journalists. Good journalists will never do that. However, this is something you can protect yourself from because identifying such obviously bad journalism is very easy for anyone. They will do things like, here's the information, here's the graph. Okay, but where did you get it? Reliable source. Yeah, but which one? Reliable. Another favorite one, doctors prove that coming to Jamaica might cause obesity. What doctors? Doctors. Dr. Smith. But Dr. Smith is a doctor of physics, not a medical doctor. But he's a doctor, smart guy, knows more than you do. Another trick low-quality journalism does, and you have to watch out for it. It became known from where? The insider told us, and no, we cannot disclose the insider. Nope. Do you know who the usual insider is? The editor next door. What is the brand of milk that competitor of yours? Happy Cow? Hey, I've got a story for you. They found a rat in a Happy Cow milk. Yeah. Or just say the insider told us. That's how it works. That's how it works. When you see something like this, newspaper article, TV story, YouTube vlog with no names as their source, or no source at all, red flag right away. It doesn't mean their story is fake, by the way. It can be true. But without facts and evidence, that story is a fiction. Maybe a good one, and maybe that's what you're looking for. Still, fiction. That's not news, not reliable information, and certainly not journalism. Professional journalists will always provide the list of references to support their story. As an example, check the description of this video. You will find the links to all the materials I used to do the research for this episode, including the original source for different graphs. I've noticed some people say things like BBC or CNN are not reliable because they keep pushing their agenda, which is often Eurocentric, or whichever political views they have. So instead, I would watch media X for balanced coverage. There is no reliable single source of media. It doesn't exist and it's impossible to create one. So if you want the truth, you have to check everything and then cross-reference everything. But even then, you might not find the truth, and here's why. The only reason all this media influence is possible is because we, as human beings, no matter how intelligent, don't tend to question things we think we know, especially if learned from childhood. Here's a good example. You might be living in a part of the world where Christmas is celebrated. Jamaica is one of these countries. We celebrate Christmas in Jamaica to remember the birth of Jesus Christ. And the chances are, you don't ask yourself, how is that relevant to a Christmas tree? Or Santa, as a matter of fact. It's not. Because originally Christmas was not related to Jesus in any way. It was a pagan tradition celebrating the winter solstice. And the image of Santa that we know today was actually created by a company known as White Rock Beverages in 1920s, and then popularized in 1931 by Coca-Cola Company. This is why we associate this jolly man character with Santa. And here's the original Santa, Saint Nicholas, a Greek priest who was born in 280 AD in Turkey. Now, how did that man become this man? And how is that related to Christmas tree and birth of Jesus? It's a long story. But this is just one example to illustrate how we don't question things we think we know, even when it's obvious they don't make any sense. We live during unprecedented times when, because of the internet, information is available at one click. The problem is when we believe in something, we don't question it, so we don't make that first click to start with. Well, we're going to take quite a lot of clicks now to see a few examples. Hollywood first, because why not? This is a Hollywood film marked for death. It represents Jamaicans as aggressive criminals who are after guns, drugs, and money. And of course, all Jamaicans are like that, obviously. While the character of Steven Seagal is the hero. It's interesting how all the bad guys in this movie have locks, this hairstyle, which is usually worn by Rastafari. Marked for Death became a Hollywood classic. Basil Wallace is a great Jamaican-American actor, but unfortunately the role he played was remembered for all the wrong reasons. From misrepresentation of Jamaicans to complete nonsense about Rastafari. Because of this film, a lot of people in the world thought that Jamaicans are practicing voodoo. Now, for those who don't know, the main religion in Jamaica is Christianity. This is a Hollywood film, and a good story needs a villain. Somebody who public can easily hate and develop more sympathy for the hero. Because Hollywood is American, the simplest and safest way to create an antagonist for the story is to use someone who's not American. Jamaicans are just one of the examples, but we also see Chinese, Mexicans, Italians, Colombians, and all-time favorite, scary and sexy Russians. That was before Middle Eastern people took everybody's place. The result? On top of xenophobia, the rise of Islamophobia. There aren't that many Hollywood films about Jamaica, apart from Cool Runnings, which I personally like. But other than that, even when Hollywood makes films in Jamaica, like The Cocktail with Tom Cruise, these kind of films don't even feature Jamaicans, as if they don't exist. Like maybe somewhere in the background.
Hey, buddy.
The name is not Buddy. Pal.
The brochure promised me a drink on the house, pal.
And that is, my friends, why Jamaicans think that Jamaica is owned by foreigners. It's not, but what would you think if you saw this?
Excuse me, my friend just passed out on the beach over there. Do you have a phone anywhere?
No. Excuse me.
She was drinking champagne in the sun.
Champagne. Perfume going in, sewage coming out.
She gonna be all right?
Yeah, she's gonna be okay.
A girl doesn't feel well on the beach. And she's saved, not by a Jamaican lifeguard who has to be on that beach, but by an American barman who came to Jamaica to make a fortune. Because that's what you do. It's so easy for foreigners. They just come and get rich. Hollywood. The reality, you can come on holiday to Jamaica, but if you want to work here as a foreigner, it's not easy at all. I have a video on how to move to Jamaica with more information. But more important than that, why does Hollywood make films in Jamaica without featuring any positive Jamaican characters? I'm wondering about that new James Bond movie. But it gets much worse when we look at documentaries.
See that Israel, see? It's from a protection.
Dead body gun, them say, our dead body gun.
You're powerful, come like next to God. And when people hear it, people have to back up, you understand?
Welcome to Kingston, Jamaica, where guns and gangs drive the drug trade. It's late afternoon in the heart of the Kingston ghetto, and local gunmen are tooling up to protect their turf.
Yes, and also they invited a journalist to film them while they're doing that, because that's what gunmen do. It's interesting how they filmed it from different angles. Like, obviously they had several cameras, and they were like, okay, can you reload it again? Yeah, because we didn't catch that.
The most notorious gang in Jamaica is the Shower Posse. They have been key players in the drug and gun supply for over 30 years.
But they got everything. They got all the money in the world. These guys bring in containers of gun. They got missiles, all that. When they say jump, they say, oh, aye.
The Dons and gangs are afforded protection from the community. If the Don system is threatened, some of the residents will fight to the death to preserve it. In 2010, America called for the extradition of Shower Posse Megadon, Michael Dudas Koch, who was wanted on drug trafficking charges.
All right. So that's right. This documentary was made after 2010. They have an insider, who works in one of the famous Jamaican gangs. But they filmed it after 2011, while that gang they mentioned got reorganized into other gangs in 2010, when their leader was arrested. So why does your insider say that he still works for that gang when that gang doesn't really exist anymore, at least not in that form?
Kingston is Jamaica's capital and largest city. Here, high levels of poverty and unemployment fuel the drug gangs.
Okay, wait a minute. Look at the statistics they show. The Kingston metropolitan area population in 2011 was 580,000. Okay. 20% of Jamaicans live below the poverty line. Poverty line is the estimated minimum level of income needed to secure the necessities of life. When people live below poverty line, it means living in extreme poverty, when you cannot get the basics such as food, clothing, and shelter. The current international poverty line is $1.90 per day. However, since poverty is a relative term, it means poverty line can vary heavily, and for each country, it is usually set at a different level. For Jamaica, namely Kingston metropolitan area, it's $4.71 per day, considering the exchange rate in 2012. Journalists use the phrase below poverty line to make it sound more dramatic, like they did here, claiming that 20% of Jamaicans, that is 560,000 people, live below poverty line. Now let's see the real figures. The latest research was done by United Nations Development Programme. To find it, we go to the library at Latin America and Caribbean Division website. Then we just find the latest report published in 2019, which features figures for 2016. And there you see the data. 0.5% of population lives in severe poverty, that is around 14,000 people. 1.7% of population lives below poverty line. As you can see, 1.7% is not exactly 20%. And when they throw statistics like that without any explanation, it's extremely misleading. So, where did they get that 20% then? 20% is the poverty rate that was in Jamaica in 2011, and I already showed you that graph. So, poverty rate is often presented as living below poverty line, which is not exactly correct, because poverty rate doesn't only look at basic needs. It takes everything into account, including the access to running water, hot water, electricity, various amenities, and so on. If we put it in simple words, poverty rate shows the percentage of people who don't have a decent living, whatever it is, for this particular country. And the other thing is, do you know what the poverty rate was in the United States in 2011? There is an official report where you can get these numbers. You can see that in 2011, poverty rate in the United States was 15%. Okay, it's lower than in Jamaica, but if you look at the actual figures, it's 45 million people. I mean, sure, I guess it's not as bad as in Jamaica, because Jamaica had 20% at that time. But what is the point you're making? Do you know what I mean? It's like... Crack interpreter.
In the 80s, John was headhunted by the Shower Posse. He was flown to America to set up some of the first crack houses in New York City. He has now returned and is attempting to set up his own crack empire in downtown Kingston.
It's a shortage on it, so it probably got a little cut. See right there? I would leave that residue on the bag. Cocaine don't really stick to the bag, and it got a milky look to it. Cocaine mostly have a shiny crystal look to it.
Well, that's because what he's showing is not what he's saying it is. It's this. Baking soda. If you leave it in humid conditions, like in Jamaica, it starts turning into these things. So, yeah. Crack is a mix of cocaine and baking soda, but for films and documentaries, journalists would use the so-called fake cocaine, which is even safe to ingest by actors if needed by the script. This would usually be powdered lactose, vitamin B, or baking soda. The reason I'm saying that is because although drug trafficking is real, the footage is often not. So what you see is not always what's actually happening.
Although ecstasy is spreading to Kingston, many there still prefer a more natural high.
Cocaine, me no know about that. Heroin, me no know about that. 2 pound of weed, me know about that.
All right.
Major Mackerel is one of Jamaica's most famous reggae dancehall artists.
Cannabis was decriminalized in 2015 in Jamaica, so at the time of that documentary, they're right, it was still illegal. If you watch this documentary or a similar one, you might be surprised to learn that only 10% of Jamaicans smoke cannabis, at least according to official statistics by World Bank and United Nations Drug Report. And as you understand, unlike journalists, the UN doesn't care how many people are going to watch and engage with their drug report. When it comes to cannabis, the reality, a lot of locals frown upon other locals who smoke. One of the reasons is precisely that. Many Jamaicans are tired of that cannabis smoking stereotype that was pushed on them and try to stay away from it. That is, of course, highly ironic, since the perception of cannabis is now changing in the world due to medical research that pushes the legalized movement. So that production is not going to age well. A more serious problem with this documentary, however, is that it presents Jamaica as the land of drugs. I suspect that was exactly the goal of the documentary. Just my opinion, because I don't see any other point. I mean, advertising drugs in Jamaica? What was the point of creating that film? Well, besides making money. I wonder if they were going to Jamaica and expected to see streets full of people suffering with drug addiction. But obviously they didn't see it, because in reality Jamaica has one of the lowest rates of drug consumption. By the way, the same for most Caribbean countries. So what kind of proof could they show in their video to match their story? A man who warms up baking soda in a microwave, and several guys who smoke ganja, which is not even considered as a drug anymore. Neither is baking soda, so... Okay, and they also have an integrated advertisement for this man with ecstasy in Mobay. On a serious note, they picked a topic that is real. Gangs exist, but they don't exist in the way they show them. Drugs exist, but it's not the consumption in Jamaica that is the problem, that are kept pushing with a narrative. It's the traffic into the US and other countries, and the demand and consumption there that is the problem. It's such a serious issue, but they turned it into some kind of a show. That documentary was an intentional bad representation of Jamaica, but sometimes it happens unintentionally. We're going to look at that famous CNN travel show with Anthony Bourdain, who is a talented chef and journalist celebrity. He passed away, unfortunately, and a lot of people love him, respect him, and believe him. And here's his visit to Jamaica.
It's not a friendly country. All that one love stuff is bullshit, frankly. You have these sandals and all-inclusive resorts that people think of as Jamaica. That ain't Jamaica. That's a very different world than the world that the people who work at those places go home to.
How many public access beaches are there in this area?
This is the only public one.
All right, they're actually filming on Winifred Beach, and yeah, it's the only public beach there because the rest are rocks. Look at the map. There are plenty of public beaches in the area as a whole. For example, there is Frenchman's Cove and Sansan Beach. Both are open to the public. But I think what the lady means is that there are entrance fees at those places. I have a video about Frenchman's Cove where I explain why this is the case. If we look right from Winifred Beach, there is Boston Beach and Long Bay. So yes, there are other public beaches in the area. The truth is, several beaches were indeed taken over by hotels, like the beach by Iberostar Resort. This is exactly what made all local people annoyed for all the right reasons, and yes, we will talk about it in a separate episode.
Yeah, what happens if... I mean, that would be sort of ridiculous if Jamaicans can't go to the beach in Jamaica.
Exactly.
Jamaica's sort of a...
Yeah, but that's not the case. Jamaicans can go to the beach in Jamaica. What he's doing is a journalistic practice called speculation when it doesn't exist, okay? But you want to push some narrative, so you come up with what if? What if people can't go to these beaches anymore? What if tourists never come to Jamaica? What if it's not happening, so forget it?
But look back on who gets to own paradise, who was there first. The Europeans were there right after the Indians, and after they killed off all the Indians, they started bringing in slaves from Africa.
They started bringing enslaved people from Africa before Indians were dead. So, and they didn't really kill off all the Indians. A lot of them survived and mixed in with the African population, largely.
Who's Jamaican? It's a very divided country. It's a little bit about tourism and development, ownership of paradise.
What do we have here?
Okay, well, first of all, it's not a divided country. It's quite a united country. That's one thing. And I'm not sure a person from the United States can be asking a question like that. Like, so who is a real Jamaican? It's not for you to ask these questions. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so what are you saying? You're an American. Who is an American then?
Oh, oxtail.
Yeah, man, curry goat.
Oh, sweet.
And then, of course, food, because Jamaican food is awesome.
Thank you. Yes, Jamaica's food is awesome. Any more on this?
And there are still, all these years later, 2 Jamaicas. There's the Jamaica that most Jamaicans live in, cook in, struggle to survive in. The real Jamaica. Then there's the Jamaica which you're probably more familiar with.
With all my respect, but what about this Jamaica? And why are you filming a few huts by the road as if these are the homes you're talking about? That's where people sell fish and other food. I mean, that's not where they live. It's interesting how they show this bus as if it's a tourist bus. Not only they misrepresent Jamaica in that show, but they also misrepresented tourists and the tourism industry as a whole. What is that supposed to mean? I understand it's a joke, but what is it supposed to represent? How Jamaicans view tourists? Or how CNN, when their show, views tourists? Sure, I get it. Better to be a traveler than a tourist. I agree. But there is nothing wrong about staying in an all-inclusive hotel, especially when you worked your ass off for 5 years to be able to afford that 1 week by the sea. The problem I see with this travel show, my opinion again, they actually made an attempt to represent local point of view, which is great, but they didn't do a proper research first. As a result, despite their really good intentions, they made the situation only worse. If I watched this documentary as a tourist, I wouldn't want to go to Jamaica. I mean, I don't want to be seen like this guy on the beach, and I certainly wouldn't want to feel like I'm exploiting the locals. Sure, there are people in Jamaica who are struggling, but they made it sound as if it's because of tourism, which makes zero sense. And as they talk about it, then they show this footage. Is that what they think struggling looks like? Here's another media piece misrepresenting Jamaica, this time from a comedy show by Chris Rock.
You know, like when you go to the Caribbean? You know, like when you go to the Caribbean, you land and you get in that van, that drive, that scary ass drive from the airport to the resort, and you're looking out the window, you're like, what the fuck? This shit! Oh my God! Whoa! You see little kids eating dreadlocks? You see Shabba Rank stabbing a dog? Shabba! 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 People looking like they never saw a car before. Will. And then you get to the resort and you're like, Jamaica's nice.
That's his punchline?
So nice. We should invite your mother. Shit. They give you 1 pina colada and you forgive the worst poverty you've ever seen.
Okay, this time attempting to mock poverty. That's fresh. The reason I know about this joke is because I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy. The rules of comedy are the following. You take true, relatable situation and you exaggerate it to make it funny. The joke Chris Rock is making about Jamaica and the Caribbean in general is not funny to me, not because it's insulting or anything, but simply because it's not true. He's not exaggerating the truth. The stuff he's talking about simply doesn't exist, at least not in Jamaica. The road from Montego Bay Airport to any resort is actually a very nice highway. It's interesting that Chris Rock did visit Jamaica later, and I wonder if he's still telling that joke. These are just a few examples among many others that pop up at different stages of your life that are forming your opinion about Jamaica without you even realizing it or trying to question it. I took the examples from different media sources like films, documentaries, shows, but the situation is a disaster when it comes to news. Why would Jamaica come up on foreign news? It's not like CNN is going to talk about new park Jamaica opened in Montego Bay. They don't care. How relevant is news about Jamaica to the rest of the world anyway? They're not. The same as news about Ukraine for Jamaicans. Why would you care? That's why the time when Jamaica comes up in international news is if some achievement happens, like in sports and music, but more often than not, it will have to do with some disasters like hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes. And the only other reason for international news to mention Jamaica is if there is some crime issue. As a result, all the good stuff we have never makes the international news, so people abroad mostly hear about Jamaica in the news when something bad happens. And then these documentaries are there just to, confirm the opinion. I don't want to touch social media yet, especially YouTube, because I'm a YouTuber as well, and criticizing other YouTubers behind their back is like starting a YouTube war. Not nice. There are a few YouTubers who create content about Jamaica that I think harms Jamaica, but I would like to talk to them directly first, because it seems they genuinely believe they're doing a good thing for Jamaica. So I'd like to ask them some questions and hear their side of the story first. But what I can comment on is the work of official local media. They're professional Jamaican journalists, they're more experienced than I am, and they have a much bigger audience than I do. I'm sure they can take it if I point out a few things in their work. But if you thought foreign media was bad, wait until you see part 2 about local media. Coming up soon. Thank you so much for watching. Many thanks to all our 22 patrons who partially cover the cost of this project. If you wish to join them and also support our independent media, you can do so from only $5 per month. My name is Irina, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.